Joining me now for the latest on this is the Deputy Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild, and News Corp senior writer, Patrick Carline. Thank you, both of you. Now, Dan, it was a bit embarrassing, I think, for Albanese to be stood up by Trump just minutes after he'd confirmed to media that he'd secured a meeting and reportedly with no prior notice to Australian officials.
Yeah, that's right. I've got to say, Caroline, that clip you just played of Keir Starmer and Donald Trump didn't fill me with a ton of confidence. They didn't seem all that invested in AUKUS, but we'll see what happens there. But look, I think you're right. The issue here is it appears to be the case that Anthony Albanese is not really taken seriously on the international stage and is not really respected. And that would be a concern for the government here. There are some within Labor who have a relatively cavalier attitude towards the United States, and some of whom are actively hostile towards the Trump administration. And whether you like Trump or not is beside the point. The US is obviously our most important ally. And so I think there's probably a sense from the United States that perhaps the current government here in Australia is not as committed and as serious as it should be about that defence relationship. So I think that explains why Trump has basically stood up Anthony Albanese on this occasion.
Pat, Dan says he's not so confident judging by those comments from the joint press conference, but Albanese says that he found those comments very positive. What do you think? Do you think the AUKUS deal is secure?
Look, it needs to be secure, Caroline, doesn't it? I mean, this is such a fundamental part of our future in terms of defending ourselves and in terms of our best friend in America. As Dan says, America is our best friend, Donald Trump or otherwise. We need America. And the fact that this meeting hasn't taken place, I don't think you can blame Albo for that. It was beyond his control. But we're sort of looking at September or perhaps later in the year before Albo will actually catch up with Donald Trump and have a chat. I mean, it does seem ridiculous given you've got AUKUS on the table at the moment and it's under a review in the US, and you've got tariffs. You've got these really nation-changing sort of issues at stake at the moment. There does need to be a meeting.
Yeah, Dan, Pat mentions tariffs. That was going to be another big part of this conversation, this face-to-face conversation between the pair. What happens now with that? I mean, everyone's talking about AUKUS, but what happens with tariffs?
Well, I think the thing with tariffs is, yeah, I mean, we should have a talk with them and see if we can have a different arrangement, but we should focus on our own backyard first. I mean, the negative economic implications of the policies that we are imposing upon ourselves are far worse than anything the United States is doing. I mean, all you have to do is look at our energy policy and policies like net zero, which are causing massive increases to energy prices and smashing our industrial sector, or the regulation and red tape that's coming out of Canberra and state governments. So I think, this government has said it wants to have a productivity agenda. Well, the first thing you do is look at your own economic policy settings. And as I say, if you can negotiate a better deal, go for it. But let's focus on the things that we can control.
Going back to that AUKUS uncertainty, there have been calls for a backup plan. Here's Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce earlier today.
You should have a contingency plan. As soon as the United States went out and said we're reviewing AUKUS, alarm bells should have rung everywhere.
Pat, is he right? Do we need a contingency plan now?
Look, there seems to be sort of confidence, guided or not, on the fact that AUKUS is safe within Australia. You see the comments from South Australia's Premier yesterday talking about the fact that we need to build submarines. And he's right. I mean, the world has been compared to the 1930s in terms of uncertainty. This could be a precursor for the next sort of world war, if you like. You've got all these conflicts going on. We need to be able to protect ourselves. And you look at those Chinese military exercises off the coast just late last year. We're not well placed to defend ourselves, and the world is going to pivot. Of that, we have no doubt. So we need submarines, we need AUKUS, and we need that to be crystal clear and locked in for decades to come. So in terms of contingencies, I don't know whether that's the right way to go, but we certainly need to protect our future.
Well, gentlemen, there's a hidden twist in the Albanese government's new super tax, and it's been brought to light. Treasurer Jim Chalmers' plan also includes a hidden death tax of sorts, where those who inherit super from someone who's died face a double tax sting, where unused tax credits will lapse, but capital gains taxes remain in place. Dan, what do you think of this idea? It hardly seems fair.
Well, I agree, Caroline, it's not fair. And it shows what happens when your spending is out of control and there's no plan to rein in government spending. And if there's no plan to rein in spending, then taxes will need to go up and debt will continue to go up, which is just taxes in the future. So my concern here is ultimately that Labor is going to go to the electorate with much higher taxes, including, really the worst part about this is the unrealised gains component, which means you're going to get taxed on income that you have yet to earn. And that is one of the most concerning parts of it. So, look, I think the more that this goes on and the more the debate goes on, the worse this looks for our country and the worse it looks for Labor.
Pat, death taxes, for a long time, the opposition, the coalition has been talking about them, about how it's something that's in Labor's plans. They've denied it for a long time, but there certainly looks like they're starting to creep in here.
Absolutely. And look, it's a second death tax, if you like, Caroline. Most Australians don't realise if you inherit super, generally there's going to be a 17% tax on at least part of that super. This is a second death tax. And that's something that Australians aren't prepared to actually cop, I don't think. This is a really big issue. And if you look at the mechanics of this tax, you're looking at $3 million super and taxes on top of that. And that's not going to be indexed. So in 10, 20, 30 years' time, it's probably still going to be $3 million, which is not going to be a great deal of money by that time. It's a really insidious tax, this one.
And don't forget the Prime Minister and a lot of ministers' own benefits won't get touched. That's probably one of the most unfair parts too. Let's move on to another story now. And disgusted parents have lashed out at a prestigious Melbourne private school over a Pride Month guest speaker that the school brought in. Trinity Boys Grammar School says it invited queer Palestinian activist Bassem Kurbaj to speak to its students on the recommendation of the taxpayer-funded Victorian Pride Centre. According to a parent, Kurbaj directed students during his speech to look up his social media page, but when they did that, they quickly found a video of him performing a lewd act. Now, the Victorian Pride Centre has removed this speaker's profile from its website, and both the centre and the school have promised to implement better vetting processes. But Dan, how could the school not have done any basic screening before inviting a controversial speaker like this to speak to children?
Oh, the principal's got to be sacked. This is just an example of how our education system's failing. And if you're a parent and you're concerned about this, change schools, stop donating to these so-called elite schools, because this is not the only example of this kind of insidious ideology being put in front of children. And I think it's just time to get real about the fact that the only thing that a lot of these private schools, the very elite ones, listen to is the bottom line. So you've got to make it hurt. And, I just think this is so removed from basic community expectations of what should be taught at schools. By the way, this is happening in the context of a rapidly declining education sector where governments are spending more and more every single year, yet results continue to go backwards. Children are less educated than in the past, and they're taught not only this kind of ideology, but they're taught to be ashamed of our country, ashamed of our history, and in doing so, ashamed of themselves. So if this isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what is.
Well, we're going to be looking at some of those problems within the education sector with my next guest. But Pat, this particular sector also has a history of making some extreme anti-Israel statements as well. He describes himself as a queer Palestinian activist. I always find that ironic given what would happen were he to actually be living in Gaza.
Absolutely. He wouldn't be able to do this in Gaza. And that's the great hypocrisy that we're seeing in the universities especially, but also in this case in secondary schools, where it's not being explained properly. The arguments are basically that, let's be pro-Palestine, but at the same time, let's blow up Israel and make it cease to exist. I mean, this argument pushing for pro-Palestine is actually dishonest in the Australian context and has been since October 7, 2023. And these sorts of activists shouldn't be anywhere near a school which is charging parents 40 grand a pop to send their kids there. It's a Christian school. And the fact that this wasn't looked at closely, that the due diligence wasn't done by the school, is a characteristic that's been true of our universities across the board, across Australia. It's a really troubling thing that this school is actually abrogating responsibility for activists addressing their students.
Yeah, really concerning, and hopefully a wake-up call for schools across the country.